are. So we are live. We are live. Welcome everybody if you're tuning in and watching. For those that don't know who I am Stephanie Lomax, President, CEO, and HR strategist for HRPro4You, an HR consulting firm that helps businesses to embrace HR. And I am joined by my colleague and friend, Siobhan J. Smith of the SJS Law Firm. We are here this morning to talk through and about several things, but specifically related to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that I just got confirmation on was signed into law last night by Congress and the President, and will take effect April the 2nd of this year, will run through the end of this year, so December 31st, 2020. So we're going to be talking about that today and a few other things that we feel like employers need to be aware of as it relates to managing employees and work situations in this particular crisis/pandemic that we're in. But before we jump in, I wanted to give Siobhan a quick opportunity to intro herself, talk a little bit about her firm, what she does.
Thank you for having me. This was a great idea, and so much has changed since we even talked about doing this last week or the beginning.
I don't know if it was that long ago. It might have been like 2 days ago.
Like 2 days ago. But my name is Siobhan Smith. I'm a business attorney. My clients are small to medium-sized businesses. I help them solve lots of problems, employment, contracts, a lot of the issues that a small business will face, but definitely been doing a lot of answering questions related to employment and how to deal with employees during this pandemic and the slowdown that many businesses have faced.
Yeah, so I guess first we can tackle what we know about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and I'll yield the floor to the attorney, so I don't jack anything up in translation.
So I always have to start these things with, this isn't legal advice, this is legal information, and especially because this is so fresh, that I'm just kind of reading up on it as it's happening. But I do think one thing to keep in mind is, even though what we're experiencing is kind of unprecedented, and this act is new, it amends something that, the FMLA Act, and, we're going to be looking to employment laws that already exist to really kind of solve the issues that are before us. So I think definitely keep that in mind. Like, even though new situation, we're always looking to things we've already done to try to figure it out. But, there are a lot of portions of the act in terms of testing and, food benefits. But I think for our purposes, for employers, what matters is the amendment to the FMLA Act, which a lot of smaller employers may not have been subject to. So that's a little different. Mm-hmm. So as it stands right now, that's been signed into law, provides 12 weeks of paid leave to employees with a qualifying need. It does apply to employers who have 500 or fewer employees, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Eligible employees have to work at least 30 days, which typically for FMLA, I think is 1,200 hours over a 12-month period.
Yeah, 1,250 over 12 months. Right. Yeah.
So much shorter trigger period for people. Man, let your son join the let him.
Oh, Hi, good morning. You want to say okay, go by.
So the trigger is a related qualified public health emergency. So it means you're unable to work or also telework. So if you're able to telework, you're probably not going to be able to take advantage of this. But due to the need to care for a child under the age of 18 who their place of care or their school has been closed or unavailable due to a public health emergency. Mm-hmm. So that definitely covers a lot of people. The initial 10-day period can be unpaid, but there may be a caveat to that. Yep. You may use the paid leave you have during that 10-day period. Leave calculated not less than 2/3 of your regular pay rate, limited to $200 a day. So FMLA, I know there's a requirement that jobs be held. If you have fewer than 25 employees, you don't have that requirement to hold the job.
Okay.
And also, even though it's fewer than 500 employees, the law has language that allows the Secretary of Labor to issue regulations to exempt small businesses with fewer than 50 employees when, and this is the trigger, the imposition of such requirements would jeopardize the viability of the business as a going concern. So it's not here now, but the Secretary of Labor can issue a regulation, which it seems like they will do, but it has to be that it's going to jeopardize your viability. I don't know how we're going to measure that. You'll probably
say, what's the qualifier?
Right, you'll probably have to prove that you weren't in and it'll probably be amount like in the past 3 years, your revenues were below a certain amount, maybe. I think something like that will be the trigger for viability. Because you obviously can have fewer than 50 employees, but be, have a lot of money. But that it could also be opposite. So that's the kind of FMLA Act. So based on what I've said, how does this differ from how FMLA is now?
So you made the one key point that in terms of who's eligible.
Mm-hmm.
So the eligibility has changed. Now it is for, well, actually there's a couple of things. What employer is eligible?
Yeah.
So now the FMLA was for employers that had 50 or more within a 75-mile radius. So multi-state employers, for example, if you had an office in Virginia that had 55 people, and you had an office in Seattle that had 20, only the office in Virginia that had the 55 would be required to follow FMLA.
Right.
I didn't see anything in that about this mile radius situation, but I think it is saying
in the aggregate.
It's an aggregate, exactly. So that's the first change that I noticed. Then the second one in terms of employee eligibility is the time factor we were talking about a second ago. Right. So, and a person normally would have to be employed for 12 months and have worked 1,250 hours to be eligible.
Yep.
Now that's 30 days, and I didn't see any hours limit on it. So if they've been employed for 30 days, they're eligible to apply for FMLA. Then there is, do they have a qualifying event? So typically, and I guess there's some similarity there, but they're specifically making this regulation about those that are affected with COVID-19. Mm-hmm. But if you were taking care of yourself because you were sick with the flu, technically you could use FMLA under the standard FMLA. Right. But now they're specifically making this caveat for those that have COVID-19. And then the other thing that I noticed is that it's a paid leave after 2 weeks. And FMLA is typically not a paid leave. Yeah. But obviously under the standard FMLA, employees can use accrued time to coincide with the FMLA so that they do get paid. But now it's a paid leave with the exception of those first 2 weeks, which now we also know under the emergency sick paid leave that you may be able to supplement those first 2 weeks with the EPSL.
Yep. Yep. So the other piece of the act is, as you just alluded to, the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. So that requires 2 weeks of paid leave for employees who cannot work or again, telework for caused by COVID-19. So that means you're unable to work because you're subject to a state, local quarantine or isolation order. Your healthcare provider has told you should quarantine yourself. You have symptoms of COVID-19 and you're seeking a diagnosis. The employee is caring for an individual who is subject to quarantine order or has been advised to quarantine. The employee is caring for a child whose school or place of care has been closed due to COVID-19. And the employee is experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services which I assume will be some sort of catch-all. It is for, if you're a full-time employee, it's 80 hours of paid sick leave. If you're part-time, it's an average of what you would have worked over 2 weeks, over the 2-week span.
Okay.
For that, it doesn't exceed $511 a day, or $5,110 in the aggregate. And in terms of who it applies to, it's again employers with fewer than 500, but there's not that caveat for regulations that exempt employers for fewer than 50.
Than 50.
So
Okay.
I haven't seen anything that would alleviate the requirement that if you employ any people, that you may be on the hook for paid leave for a 2-week period of time.
Yeah.
And it's not, I as I understand it, it's continual. So if, they come back to work, and I don't know if you can dip back into it if you work for 3 months and on December 1st you want to use this leave. I'm not sure if it works that way, right? If it's like accruing, like it's not accruing, so I don't know if it, like if you hold it in the bank and anytime before the year is over you can use, maybe that's the case.
Yeah.
If someone does develop symptoms and you need to use it at that time, that may be the case. So obviously that's a huge burden for a lot of small businesses who don't already, like maybe you are in a state that you have paid leave, like you're in DC or Maryland, but this is still more extensive than that. And a lot of states, as we know, don't have any sort of paid leave or requirement. So it is a lot, I think. So in order to alleviate the burden, and I feel like a lot of this may shift to providing businesses a quarterly tax credit. And I don't know how, the numbers are somewhere, I just don't have them here, that you can use. Maybe it's $10,000 a quarter or $10,000 a year. So there's a tax credit that's supposed to make this more manageable.
To kind of offset.
However, I mean, you have to write a check now for a credit
that you might get.
you might get later.
Right.
If you qualify, and obviously there'll be all sorts of regulations surrounding that. And, there may be, I think the question now is the immediate need for employees.
Yeah.
At some point there may be more for employers, but I don't know if that's kind of where the pressing issue for our lawmakers is right now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And you made a good point too, about the time frame. So we were kind of talking through how long how long this act will, or when the act will expire, which is the end of this year.
Yeah.
So it may be that because we don't have a handle on the virus, and it is specifically here in the US,
right,
fast spreading.
Yeah.
And there is no vaccine for it in the immediate future. 12 months, I think is what I heard, somewhere between 6 and 12 months before a vaccine is available. So maybe that is the reason why they have it extended through the end of this year, because somebody could present symptoms in August or September or October.
Absolutely, when we've all kind of gone back to work and everything's open back up, but it's still, the threat is still exists.
Exactly. So that's highly possible. So, I mean, that was kind of a good unpacking of that as we know it now. Well, I mean, it's signed into law now, so I guess it's technically official. But let's talk also about some of the laws that are already in place. So this is a new one, but what kind of things are in place already that an employer would be subject to, regardless of COVID-19 or not? Like, are there other federal laws that apply to leave and accommodations and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I would say, obviously, if you already had a paid leave policy, like that would be something. Employers are free to create a paid leave policy if they didn't have one, or some sort of unpaid leave policy. So that is available. I think that the ADA, so you mentioned reasonable accommodation. I think that if a person has a disability that maybe like puts them at higher risk for COVID-19,
Mm-hmm.
you may have to make some sort of accommodations, which involve telework, where you may not be allowing telework or time off or something like that. So that may be something that employers have to tap into. I think they're probably, if I mean, this has been amended, but even if it hadn't have been, FMLA maybe could have kicked in, even if you had someone who was sick with COVID-19
Right.
in your family, you had to care for them. Even if this new law weren't signed into act, I think that's something that you could have relied on as well.
Yeah, with the exception of the school piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exception of the school piece, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that actually brings up a good point. So in regards to the ADA, so those that are more susceptible to things, people that have pulmonary or respiratory issues, they obviously are, at higher risk. And if an employer didn't have a telework policy for anybody else, they may have to make that policy or that accommodation for them to do so, assuming that it doesn't create some type of hardship for them to do it. Okay. What about OSHA? We touched on that when we were kind of talking about what to flush through.
I think obviously a lot of people are doing this anyway. They're extra sanitizing their workspaces and making sure they're clean. OSHA is one of those things that I think if you are an office building or an office worker, it's not something that you think about because it's like, you're thinking construction or like actually dangerous. But all employers have the obligation to create a space that's not dangerous, that's free from harm, and employees, as I understand, definitely have a right to not show up to a place that there is dangerous or physical harm present.
Right.
So I think that is definitely something people can look to, and that can be invoked if employee can make an argument like, is this space inherently dangerous? But I don't know. I think you would have to show like maybe someone was there who was infected and the place and that your employer didn't disinfect the place. Then maybe you have an argument. But I think that if it's being sanitized and clean, I don't know if you have the argument that you're walking into a dangerous environment or where physical harm is present.
Okay. All right. So for office employers, we just need to, like, they basically need to just be aware that they're required to clean. To be clean and to sanitize and disinfect, kind of maybe more so than they normally would have. So, the janitorial companies that come in maybe twice a week, maybe they come 3 times a week or something like that, just to do a deep sanitize, clean, just in case, because again, we don't really know a lot about how the COVID-19 virus presents, because it could present differently in different people. So some people may carry it and never show a symptom, or show very mild symptoms that could be, seen as maybe allergies or something like that, Who knows?
I think you just, as an employer, want to show that you're being extra, like more like over the top cautious in caring, and providing, like even when we've talked about this for some of your clients, like making sure that supplies are there, and that employees feel like it's a safe environment.
Yeah. To the extent that you can get supplies, hand sanitizers, it's like they've never made it. I mean,
listen,
anyway,
I'm gonna start a business over here. I have some alcohol, some aloe vera gel. I want to start making it.
My husband and I, just sidebar story, were at the store like 3 days ago, and he got a small thing of witch hazel, that has like a pump on the top of it, so we were just kind of thinking of, because that's all that's there. Like, you can't buy any latex gloves anywhere. You can't buy any of that stuff. And we did do like a small order on Amazon for some things, but it's going to be 2 weeks before it gets here.
and they might call you in a week and tell you it's on back order.
Exactly. So yeah, crazy. All right. So let's talk about from the employer perspective, what can employers say, ask of, do to, I hate to say it that way, employees as it relates to this COVID-19 virus. So they're like, I was on a webinar a few days ago where they were talking about, temperature checking. I don't know who would really want to do that, but anyway, but employers asking questions of their employees as it relates to symptoms that may be presented. So what's the law say around that? Like, what can you do and cannot do?
I mean, I think confidentiality and privacy still exist.
Yeah.
So I don't know if temperature checks work. Like if you could, because there are a lot of reasons why a person could have a temperature that aren't related to this. So I think you can definitely have policies like if you are sick, stay home. If you are exhibiting symptoms, these particular symptoms, I don't know if we're to the point where you can do temperature checks on people beyond just kind of asking them that if you have a fever to stay home. Because if you do take their temperature and then they are forced to reveal to you like, oh, I have this temperature because X, that could be a whole other can of issues that you're opening.
Yeah. So I think, good points. We can ask, are you presenting any symptoms? Have you presented any symptoms, or have you been around anybody that's presented symptoms? But we can't ask, do you have COVID-19 virus? Similar to, you can't ask, do you have diabetes? Do you have high blood pressure? I mean,
and to that point, if someone, and this is hard for a small employer, I think you still have a confidentiality. Like if someone does have it at the job, I don't know if you can then tell. I mean, you can't send out an email and say Mary Sue has. I don't think you can do that. Now it's really hard when you're small because then people will know who it is.
Yes.
But to the extent that you can keep a diagnosis confidential, you still have that obligation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. It's tough. I mean, I think it's tough for everyone, but obviously smaller employers are feeling it more, so because they're smaller, so they can't absorb. I mean, everybody's going to take a hit in some kind of way with this situation, but certainly our smaller employers and small business owners are, more largely affected, I think. So we touched on throughout like since we've been talking, we talked about like the telework and remote work and stuff. For employers that don't have policies, they might have to create.
Absolutely.
I have a client that had to do that. I mean, they had a teleworking policy, but it was not in relationship to this kind of situation. It was they may request a teleworking accommodation. It has to be approved. It has to be for a certain period of time. So they had kind of like, it's an option, but we weren't really exercising the option for people because they are a very hands-on operation. However, they've adjusted because they kind of had to, right? So this is a good test, I think, too, for employers who believed that their infrastructure wasn't really set up to do remote work. They're finding that they can get creative real quick if they need to keep operations going. Like they can't shut down. Some of them can, but a lot of them cannot. You know? So
what's in the policy that you just created then for the?
So it's good question. What they're doing is they are requiring specific check-in points. So they have it, and it fluctuates a little bit by department because everybody's department does something a little bit different. Accounting, for example, can do a lot of stuff remotely. They don't really need to be there because they can run systems from home or log in access. I think one of the biggest concerns for most employers is vulnerability of their data. So they're having to set up like VPN access to make sure it goes through a secure line. this particular client, most of them have company issued laptops. So they're not using their personal things. They're not using their personal phones necessarily. They have work issued phones. So the secure access, I think, is a important aspect of consideration with the teleworking. So some of it varies. To get back to your question, some of it varies by department, but in general, everybody is required. The team leads for the department are required to check in with their staff first thing in the morning, talk about what's happening throughout the course of what's planned to happen throughout the course of the workday.
Yeah.
And then they're doing like a last 4:30 check-in or something like that at the end of the day to kind of recap and then talk about what needs to happen next. And then they're having as needed ad hoc conversations in between. Employees are contacting clients and having conversations with them. So there's a lot of people are busy. I mean, it's busy. It's crazy. Like I know there's a lot of industries that are supremely affected by this because they're service-based, but they're face-to-face service-based, or like retail establishments and stuff like that. And they're really having a hard time because they're limited. But some of my clients are, I mean, they are, I don't want to say busier than ever, but they're busy because they're having to do so much independently, separate from everybody.
Yeah.
So trying to kind of touch base and check in more, because you're not seeing them walk around the office as much.
Yeah. I think that if you had to switch to telework and you didn't have a policy, you should definitely try to create one now and not kind of have people just kind of working on the fly.
Right.
Definitely you have to, people are home with their kids, so you want to be flexible and focus on maybe goals as opposed to hours requirements maybe. And I think that creating I don't know, how do you try to build in some sort of wellness for employees during a period like this?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So one of the things that I think I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the employee that was out sick. And we were asking about a doctor's note or something like that. So a lot of the insurance carriers are doing like televisits. So that's a good way just to do, and I know that they've got all these communications out about staying safe and the precautions you need to take, et cetera. Particularly for those that are either more susceptible, that are senior citizens, if you're caring for parents, things like that. So that whole wellness check thing can be done all now virtually. They've kind of been on the forefront of that. Like they've had televisits and on-call nurses and things like that for a good little while, but it's ramped up now for sure. So maybe part of that, as it relates to this situation, if an employer has to put in place a policy, a remote working policy, then maybe they should, mention concerns, questions. You should, do televisits, do nurse on call, try as best you can to, eat more healthy, even when you're at home. I'm feeling miserably at that. I'm trying to eat everything in here. And that cabin fever is real.
It's interesting because I tell people, and I think I don't know if you work from home a lot, but I work from home a lot. So it's not that different for me. But my outside connection to the world of networking, lunch, clients, meetings, like going to the gym, once that is cut off, like that is isolating. And I think that there are employees who have never experienced that.
Yes.
Who are experiencing that, and then kind of employers making sure that they're dealing with that, and coming up with creative ways to keep people engaged.
Another thing that a lot of my clients have access to through some of their carriers are employee assistance programs. So not only about keeping folks engaged and not feeling like they're completely disconnected, but for some, that interaction and engagement or lack of interaction and engagement can lead to stress, depression, all that kind of stuff. And how do employers deal with that as well and speak to that? So those EAPs are important, I think, to remind employees that they have access to that if they do, which most carriers have something in place where people can call, like a crisis hotline or something like that, just to keep conversation going with somebody that's, professional, that can kind of talk people through what some of their stress related or depression related issues are as it relates to being isolated and away from people.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that employers, one, are going to have to start having those things. If you don't already have some sort of employee assistance like that, making sure you have that in place. And then to the point about remote work, maybe part of the hiring, like once onboarding someone now, is going to be making sure they have everything they need to remote work. Like, which do you have internet access? And so making sure people are set up as part of the onboarding process so that it's seamless if it ever, has to happen again on a mass scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really going to change the way that businesses operate in general.
Yeah.
Businesses that didn't have telework options where people can work from home one day a week, maybe that's what happens after this is all over, because infrastructure has been set up and tested on a very, very large scale. So now, maybe that's something, and that's a perk and a benefit for small businesses especially, right? Because a lot of large businesses, well, I don't know statistics and numbers, but I would guess that larger businesses have more of that flexibility to do telework, and small businesses don't, or tend to shy away from it a little more. But now we know that it is an option. It can be done.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's part of what happens in terms of business operations in general.
Yeah. And I think even talking about the ADA, when we talk about reasonable accommodations, there may have been things that you said weren't a reasonable accommodation that I don't know if you'll still be able to credibly say that we can't do that, or it's not reasonable, or it's a hardship, because it'll be hard to roll it back once it's out there.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of the what ifs that are down the road coming, I'm sure. Or how do we, after the dust kind of settles around this. And it's a lot of things that folks are going to have to consider now that they didn't have to, meaning long term. Right?
Yeah.
We're all kind of in it now, but what happens after things kind of get back to some sense of normalcy? How do we resume normal business operations, and what exactly does that look like?
Yeah.
So I know this is always a touchy subject, but how do employers, or what would be your recommendation for employers that need to implement some kind of disciplinary action as it relates to work not getting done? Because we talked a second ago about goal setting versus, are you working 8 hours a day like you would be required to if you were coming into the office? So what happens? Like, what does that look like for employers to, and how difficult could that be to manage?
I think it'll be very difficult. Because people, like I said, kids are home. I don't know. I'm sure it'll be an interesting science experiment when people start reporting, like talking about this. How productive were people at home? Were they less? Were they more? Were they productive with their kids there? Did they get more done in a short period of time because they had to? I think those kind of questions will be interesting. I think that obviously you want to look to whatever policy you already had in place. So you want to be kind of consistent to what it had been across the board. So if someone did something 2 months ago and it was something you would have disciplined, you probably want to try to be as consistent as possible in this environment. But I do think you probably need to have I don't know how you have some grace, but be consistent for what you did 2 months ago.
Right.
But I think that if you had to make an argument that this is why you did this then and didn't do it now, that would very well be a reasonable argument that the circumstances had changed.
And I think a lot of, when I'm thinking about this, because we are having to be in touch more.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things for managers is responsiveness.
Yeah.
Like the expectation of when someone's going to be able to respond or reply to requests, questions, client email communications, et cetera. Like responsiveness I see being like a big thing. Like somebody can't contact you or shouldn't be able to contact you at 8 a.m. and you don't get back to them until 4, unless there's some like real reason why it couldn't happen, you know? But I think I see or foresee responsiveness and setting the expectations for responsiveness as being one of those big things for employers to manage to, so that everybody's kind of on the same page.
Right. As part of your telework policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you know, it could vary slightly by department or function, just because some things may take longer to respond to. But yeah. And then obviously, you know, just not getting it done at all, that doesn't work even without the situation we're in. So, having those goals, you know, by the end of the week, I will have completed.
And it's making it more like that. I mean, because again, kids are home. I don't know how you mandate like hourly what a person is doing. But you can set some reasonable goals, like finish this by, you know, whatever time. And again, I think we're going to find that people may be getting more done in shorter periods of time.
I feel like a lot of, in even the clients that I've spoken with, that's kind of the thought and the hope, I think, that people can be more productive because we're forced to have more higher touch in terms of communication because we're not in each other's face right now. I don't know. This has been good. Any other closing thoughts, recommendations you've got for businesses?
I think that, you know, at the core, most employees are still at will. So I know there are some people, like I know Compass Coffee and a couple other local kind of bigger restaurant chains are laying people off, terminating people. If you have a certain number of employees, there are notice requirements. Typically, I think it's over like 50 or 100 employees.
Is that the Warren
Act? So there's a federal Warren Act. States have their requirements. I think that there may be some modifications to that as well, because the unemployment system is going to be very burdened with lots of people terminating. So I think you do want to remember that employees are still at will, but you still can't terminate a person for an improper purpose. So you can't terminate a person because you're discriminated against them because of their national origin, maybe related to this, because they're asking you questions about what their leave may be, or they're enforcing a right that they have. Like that still exists. You can't terminate a person for that. So I think to remember that is important. And to be the grace and kindness as much as possible that we all can extend to each other as we're figuring it out. I think the fallout will be, you know, long, but people like you are here to help. I'm here to help.
Absolutely.
And here to figure it out. So if people have questions, call me, email me.
Matter of fact, why don't you share? I have one other point I want to make. But go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and share your contact info with everybody?
So phone is 202-505-5309. Website is the SJS Law Firm. I'm Siobhan at the SJS Law Firm. I am Siobhan J. Smith across most of the social media channels. And if you have questions about this, questions about contracts, you have vendors you can't pay, just like you're kind of grappling, please feel free to give me a call.
And you brought up a good point, which I don't know how I forgot about this, but unemployment claims. So so it is, I mean, clearly going to be an uptick. Because specifically related to layoffs, albeit them temporary. I know specifically in the state of Maryland, they have that listed as an option. Is it temporary, 10 weeks or less or something like that? And I'm sure other states have something similar to that as well, that it's a temporary layoff. But what should employers expect in terms of having to pay unemployment claims? I think there's some eligibility requirements. So depending on how much money the person has made, how long they've been employed there, things like that. But what's just kind of overall should employers look for, and will this law that's been passed, has there been some consideration about unemployment tax? I don't know if the tax credit deals with the unemployment piece or.
I don't think so. I think that, I don't know if unemployment, if the various states will alter their unemployment, because obviously there are, you've had to have made so much money and work. So those things may be altered on a state by state basis.
Yeah.
I think that the money that relates to unemployment that I think is part of this act is more to the states to help them deal with.
Got it.
Implementing and funding. I don't know if there will be help for employers who obviously are going to face a high burden too, with their unemployment tax. That may be part of some relief that's given. But I think for some employers, they've just done the math that whatever hit they take in that unemployment tax is less than what they'll have to pay if they just keep people working and there's no
True.
actual work for them
True.
to be doing. So,
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, I mean, this has been a lot of information. I think there's a lot more coming, but
yes.
at least at this point, I think, most employers were waiting, and us too, right? You and I and others like us that are in this field were waiting with bated breath for weeks on what is the law going to say.
Yeah.
And it kind of went back and forth. It got a little crazy a couple days ago, but it seems like they settled on something that looked to be relatively reasonable. So I guess we just, now manage to that accordingly. Thank you so much for agreeing to join me on this. I think it was
having the idea.
Yeah. I just, my whole goal is to just disseminate information as much as relevant, timely information as much as possible. I know that the media and social media and all that is just flooded with all of this, but I thought it would be good to talk to subject matter experts about, real life situations that are happening for these small businesses and how we can help them navigate through that. So,
thank you again.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So you guys, thanks for joining. Don't forget, if you are watching the replay, thank you, and make sure that you share this out. You have, this is posted on the business page, and I'll be sharing it out also via social media. I'll provide the link so that folks can watch the replay. Thank you guys again. And I believe our next Facebook Live is going to be on Tuesday, the 24th, but I'll get that information posted out as soon as I can. The next guest is going to be Lisa Anderson.
Love Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa's going to be talking about how to continue to build a legacy in the midst of a crisis. She's a small business advisor, outsourced CFO, and business strategist. So that'll be a good talk too, just to kind of talk about how to keep plugging and doing things we need to do to keep our businesses growing. We'll have a story to tell at the end of it. That's for sure. If nothing else.
We'll all have a book to write.
That's right. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. And for you guys that joined, thank you again. I appreciate it. And we will catch you next time.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right. See ya.